man with bad table manners who liked to flash wads of cash as he told of his tales of daring blockade runs during the American Civil War. But what started as swindling turned into mass murder, and one man's greed would cost 81 people their lives in a single blow. This is the incredibly true tale of Alexander Keith Jr., nickname the Dynamite Fiend. Hey y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Pottorff. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends in Thailand.
Yes?
Yindi Tandrab, Yindi Tandrab, Yindi Tandrab.
You're really good at these.
And that's for our special friend, Paitoon.
Oh, hi, Paitoon.
Little shout out to my buddy.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to like, rate, and review the podcast. You can subscribe to us wherever you're listening right this second.
Yep.
And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below.
Please do.
You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And if you want us all the time, 24/7, always a part of your life,
Yeah.
please go join our closed Facebook group, the In-Laws and Outlaws. Just go to Facebook and type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws, answer a few questions, and you're in.
And that H2H is with a numeral 2.
Number 2.
Yes.
So go join.
Okay.
I like to post lots of photos and stuff in there. And there's just a whole lot of us, good group of caring, true crime, loving people.
Yep.
We're getting case suggestions right and left and true crime listener stories. Keep them coming. We appreciate everybody who listens each week and takes time to drop us a note. Your support means everything to us.
Sure does.
I am going way back in time today.
Okay.
Rob is a huge war buff.
Mm-hmm.
World War II is his thing.
Yep.
Like, we had to get separate Netflix accounts or who was watching because Nazi stuff and Hitler kept showing up in my feed. I'm like, no, well, I don't want to watch. Why are these like being suggested to me?
And just to be clear, I am not a Hitler fan or a Nazi fan.
He's not a Hitler or Nazi fan, but you know.
But that was World War II. My father served in World War II, so that's why I have a big interest in it.
Yeah, and I like true crime and rom-com.
Shut up, please. I'm very busy and important.
I know it's an odd, a little weird combination, but yeah, I kept getting suggestions for, World War II and how they took out Hitler. Is Hitler still alive? Anyway, but I digress.
Yes.
We had to get separate little, accounts for that. But today we're talking about the American Civil War.
Oh.
Before we begin, I want to thank some sources: Murderpedia, Cracked.com, UnravelHalifax.ca, Hazlitt.net, Saltwire.com, Neatorama.com, GannettFandom.com, Find a Grave, Maritime Museum, GothamCenter.org, the New York Times, and History.net.
All right. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Alexander Keith was born on September 23rd, 1827.
Wow.
In Caithness, Scotland.
We're going way back.
Going way back. He's born in the Scottish Highlands. Alexander went by Sandy. That was his nickname, Sandy. And he immigrated to Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, when he's just a little boy. I think the family moved there so Sandy's father, John, could be near his older brother and Alexander's namesake, the first Alexander Keith, who founded a brewery there called Alexander Keith's.
Nice.
In 1820.
Okay.
They've been around for over 200 years. They're
Wow.
still there.
And that's the name of the brewery?
Alexander Keith's.
I wonder what kind of beers they make. I'm sure it's called Alexander's.
It's called Alexander Keith's. I've
Okay.
seen it. I've been to the website.
Okay.
They have like a blonde beer. They have like a dark beer. There's like a bunch of different ones.
I haven't seen that at Kroger.
No, I think probably because it's Canadian.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they've been around for over 200 years. They're
Okay.
hugely successful.
Okay.
I also read that Sandy's dad, John, also had a brewery, but his didn't make it.
Oh. Okay.
Sandy worked for his uncle for a bit as a clerk, and his uncle was a really well-respected businessman and was even the mayor of Halifax
Oh,
3
wow.
times.
Wow.
Sandy saw how wealthy his uncle was, and he wanted to be a big shot too. So he started going by Alexander Keith Jr., which was not his given name at birth. And he would actually identify himself legally as Alexander Keith the Younger.
Okay.
He wants to trade on his uncle's good name.
Gotcha.
And he does. He actually kind of becomes his uncle's right-hand man for a bit and moves into Keith Hall with his uncle, this beautiful mansion. Sandy's uncle has a side business selling industrial gunpowder. So Sandy began selling off this high-end quality gunpowder, and then he would replace it with a lower grade of powder to railway companies.
So he was cutting it like cocaine.
He's cutting the gunpowder like it's cocaine. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And these people, these railway companies are using him as their supplier, and he's just putting the extra cash in his pocket.
Wow.
But when some of the clients began to catch on to his scheme, he took matters into his own hands.
Yeah.
And on August 14th, 1857, the Merchant's Powder Magazine in Halifax mysteriously explodes.
It was totally coincidental.
Totally coincidental.
Yep.
And the last person to have access to that building is its most frequent customer, Alexander Sandy Keith.
Imagine that.
And the whole building full of gunpowder just goes kaboom. I mean, you can imagine.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Sandy avoided arrest, and the police barely investigated because of the very reputable Alexander Keith, his uncle, who had been the mayor for 3 times and owned this famous brewery.
Wow.
And it's pretty widely known that money exchanged hands under the table to keep Sandy out of trouble.
I'm sure.
So he isn't arrested, but he wasn't working for his uncle anymore either. He was out on his own because he had been living in Keith Hall, remember, this grand residence.
Sure.
But in 1863, Sandy moved out into a luxury suite at the Halifax Hotel. I always think it's so weird that people just lived in hotels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, it'd be kind of nice. They bring your bedding to you and they do your towels and you can send your laundry down.
Yeah, it's like the incredible Burt Wonderstone.
Yeah, exactly. Steve Carell. Yeah,
Just
perfect.
sets his plates out in the hallway.
Andale, por favor.
That's exactly what he does.
Yeah.
This fish was for peasants.
Yeah.
Horrible gruel. I imagine this is what prisoners eat.
I imagine this is what they serve inmates.
Is that what he says?
Something like a
That's good.
Prison or inmates. I don't know.
That's good. But for Sandy, leaving the comfort of his uncle, the timing is kind of perfect because south of Canada, the United States of America was a hot mess. It's in turmoil. And they're in the middle of a civil war.
Wow.
And the war is hugely profitable, and there is money to be made, and Sandy saw this.
He's going to get himself some.
So just for reference, on April 12th, 1861, at 4:30 a.m., Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor, and 34 hours later, the Union forces surrendered, and the U.S. Civil War had begun.
Oh, wow.
For the next 4 years, the United States is going to be a mess, but a big old hot mess seemed to be Sandy's forte, and he's ready to be a smuggler, a blockade runner, and a war profiteer.
Wow. The trifecta.
The big trifecta.
Yeah.
And when the Civil War begins, Sandy is 34 years old.
Okay.
And here's why he's so giddy about it. Because Canada's neutral in the middle of the Civil War, and it's a perfect place for Confederate spies and smugglers and ne'er-do-wells to hang out. It was also the perfect place for Canadian crooks like Sandy to take advantage.
Wow.
He partnered with a man named Benjamin Weir, a wealthy and established import-export merchant, and quickly became involved in provisioning blockade runners, beginning with Fanny and Jenny in July of 1863. Sandy became the Halifax agent for the importing and exporting company of the state of Georgia, owned by steamboat pioneer and blockade runner Gazaway Bug Lamar.
These names.
It just gets better. Just wait.
Gazaway. How would you get it's got to be a family name.
Well, he went by Bug.
Mm.
B-U-G-G.
Better than gas.
Bug Lamar. Better than Gaz. Yeah. Now, because people needed to conduct trade outside of the United States, like Canada, but needed to travel by boat, those ships couldn't be fired upon. So it wasn't their dog and not their fight.
They were a lot more polite back in the Civil War.
They were very polite back in the Civil War. It wasn't shoot first and ask questions later.
Yeah, exactly.
But Sandy became one of the Confederate Army's top agents in Canada, blockade running and organizing ships to get supplies in and out of the South. And he was helping to disrupt the Union war efforts in any way he could. Or so they thought, because he's more of a thug for hire than anything. And Sandy's involved in a lot: sabotage, arms smuggling, counterfeiting, piracy. He even earned a name amongst his Confederate friends. They called him the Confederate Consul, and he loved it.
Oh, man. Okay.
In The Godfather, he's the consigliere.
Not a Sicilian, but I think he's going to be consigliere.
Yeah.
In December 1863, he cemented his association with all these blockade runners when he played a significant role in the so-called Chesapeake Affair. Captured by Confederate agents disguised as civilians, the passenger ship Chesapeake was retaken by 2 Union warships, and the seizure, though it took place in Nova Scotian waters, angered the British, and it sparked an international incident. And eventually, a delicate compromise was reached. Chesapeake was brought to Halifax, where 3 prisoners, all British subjects who plotted to take over the ship, were to be turned over to the local authorities. 2 were to be released, while the third, George Wade, had actually shot and killed a Chesapeake sailor. He was to be arrested and then extradited to the United States.
Okay.
They were ready to turn George Wade over to the American Navy. And they took him, they unshackled him and stood him on the pier. And as he's there, a free man for like 5 seconds before he's arrested by the Nova Scotian authorities, during this tiny little brief moment of freedom, a rowboat appears alongside the wharf. 3 men simultaneously assaulted William Hutt, who was the local arresting officer. They beat him with a club. George Wade hops into the boat, and 2 oarsmen pull away, taking him away.
At 0.03 miles an hour.
Not very James Bond. Right?
Wow.
Not very James Bond, but they throw him in the boat and start rowing. Now, one of the 3 men who beat Officer Hutt, Sandy Keith.
No.
And even though it was obvious what had happened and who was guilty, the charges against the 3 and their trials were a joke. Witnesses insisted that since Officer Hutt was not in uniform, that the men were heroes for having intervened when he was seen with a weapon.
Okay.
They had good attorneys, even in the 1800s.
Yeah, I'm going to say, yeah.
Now, after George Wade escapes, New York City's postmaster intercepts a letter that's written in a complex code. It was addressed to Sandy Keith in Halifax. And fortunately for the Union, 3 War Department telegraph operators had taught themselves the art of code breaking. They were known as the Sacred 3.
Okay.
And this cryptoanalysis finally deciphered this letter, and a second letter was seized 3 days later. But the encoded letters were written by a Confederate agent known as J.H. Cammock, and it revealed a vast network of spies and agents throughout the Union, and even extending to Montreal and Halifax, and the covert operators' plans, which included everything from counterfeiting and currency printing to piracy. This letter is addressed to Sandy.
Wow.
There was a plot to buy and smuggle 12,000 muskets into the South and another to seize and arm vessels to be operated as raiders. There were even plans to use Greek fire, an ancient chemical concoction, to start fires in New York City.
Wow.
And here's how that went down.
Okay.
Sandy's a part of this plan to burn down New York City, to burn it to the ground. And 8 Confederate agents made their way south from Canada to the Big Apple. They checked into 8 different hotels in the city. On November 25th, 1864, these 8 men set fire to their hotels and started throwing Molotov cocktails into buildings around the city, including P.T. Barnum's Museum of Curiosities.
Where they first enslaved elephants.
It's said that in this very room, P.T. Barnum first had the idea to enslave elephants.
Okay, Ghostbuster.
Who are you going to call?
A New York Times article from November 27th, 1864 read, quote, "The plan was excellently well conceived and evidently prepared with great care, and had it been executed with 1/2 the ability with which it was drawn up, no human power could have saved this city from utter destruction," end quote.
I'm going to say they didn't carry it off very well.
They didn't. These guys are horrible arsonists. And the fires they set were put out with any delay or problem. But the plan was for the fires to be spread out as much as possible, except through Broadway, where they wanted to see it in a complete blaze. They did carry it out on November 25th. It all began at the St. James Hotel, corner of Broadway and 25th Street. Next, the Fifth Avenue Hotel, extending from 23rd to 24th Street. Then, missing the New York Hotel, which seems was not included in their list, they went to the Lafarge House and Winter Garden Theater just below Amity Street, which today is West 3rd.
Okay.
Next was the St. Nicholas Metropolitan, the Howard on Broadway, Belmont, the Astor, the United States Hotel. Who knew that there was a United States Hotel in New York City?
Yeah.
And the New England Hotel and the Bowery. So all the big New York City hotels, all at the same time. Several hay barges along the river were set on fire, and attempts were made in the P.T. Barnum's museum. And they couldn't get anything going because the fire department knew what was happening.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because of the code breakers.
Yeah.
Okay. So they just kind of sat around and waited and said, okay, there's going to be a fire here in about 15 minutes, so you guys might want to get your stuff ready.
Yes. That was a lot of it.
Yeah.
But another part of it was none of these Confederates, none of these people from the South had ever visited New York City before. And they arrive and they got to burn it down, but they didn't do any scouting.
Yeah.
And they didn't find out which were the most flammable targets. And one of the Confederates was actually thrown out of his hotel for loudly proclaiming his Alabama-born accent.
Yeehaw! Yippee-ki-yay! Yeah!
And the merits of secession.
Wow.
So none of the guys had any experience with incendiaries.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
But these Confederate spies trusted these 8 guys with 144 firebombs. Yeah. And they only spent a few moments practicing with them out in the open.
Seriously?
In the daytime.
You kidding me?
In Central Park.
That's stupid.
Hey, y'all, watch this. God.
Exactly.
Duh.
I mean, it's laughable. It really is.
Wow.
It really is laughable. But it was very lucky that these Confederates so thoroughly bungled their mission on November 25th.
I think that's an understatement.
Because had these 8 young men from Kentucky, Virginia, and Louisiana been more professional, New York City would have been in ashes the next day.
Yeah.
But while Sandy is working for the Confederacy, he's also running his own little cons on the side. He once pitched to the Confederates to buy a train from a Northern company, then send it racing through the Union soldiers and lines to help the South. He then pitched it to 3 Confederate spies individually. They all gave him money for the same train. He kept over half of the money. then bought the train with the rest, but somebody tipped off the Union government and they impounded the train in Philadelphia before it could ever leave the factory. And then he goes back to his investors and is like, oh, sorry, guys.
Sorry.
Your investment's lost.
Wow.
But he had made $50,000 from that.
I wonder what that's worth today.
It's worth about $1 million.
Wow.
I know that because we're going to talk about another transaction, and I do know what it was worth in today's money.
Okay.
Now, by late 1864, the South is losing, and even though it seemed as if the Confederacy was going down, Sandy didn't want it to happen. So he teams up with a guy from Kentucky named Luke Blackburn.
Okay.
Luke Blackburn was a doctor, a philanthropist, and eventually a politician. He was the first physician to serve as governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. By the way, we aren't a state. We are a commonwealth.
Commonwealth. Just
Much like Virginia.
Virginia, yeah.
Exactly. We do have a Blackburn Correctional Facility in Kentucky.
Ah, yeah.
Which is kind of ironic based on what I'm about to tell you now.
All right.
Dr. Blackburn earned his medical degree from Transylvania University right here in Lexington.
Wow.
And then he moved to Natchez, Mississippi, where he gained fame for the first successful quarantine against yellow fever in the Mississippi River Valley. Now, he was too old to serve in the Civil War, but he acted as a civilian agent for the governments of Kentucky and Mississippi, and by 1863, he was aiding Confederate blockade runners in Canada, which is where he meets Sandy Keith.
I didn't realize that Canada played such a pivotal role
I didn't
in
either.
the Civil War. I don't know a lot about the Civil War, but yeah.
Well, I bet I'm going to find a bunch of Civil War stuff in his Netflix account now. What do you all think?
No, I'm still stuck on World War II.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Canada had such an impact on the Civil War either. But it makes sense because they're just north of us.
Sure, yeah.
In 1864, the good doctor went to Bermuda to help combat a yellow fever outbreak there because it threatened the Confederate blockade runners. Or was it for another reason? You see, Dr. Blackburn volunteered to collect soiled clothing and linens from the yellow fever patients and had them sent through Halifax to cities in the north for auction.
Wow.
They're actually attempting bioterrorism in the Civil War.
Man.
They even had an assassination scheme worked up where they would send a fine suit and shirts exposed to yellow fever to President Lincoln.
Oh, geez.
But the delivery man, a guy named Geoffrey Hyams, lost his nerve and didn't deliver the suit.
Oh, man.
But none of it worked anyway because yellow fever is spread by mosquitoes and not human contact.
Yeah.
But Dr. Blackburn didn't know this, apparently.
What a doctor.
Yeah. I don't think anybody knew that at the time.
Yeah.
Still, the South is losing this war, and blockade runners like Sandy Keith are looking to squeeze out every last opportunity before the war is over. Confederate operates were giving him all kinds of money while secretly he was making other plans. Sandy is inspired by a guy named Thomas Courtenay, a man from St. Louis who sold insurance.
Okay.
Thomas Edgeworth Courtenay was born in Belfast, Ireland, and came to America in 1842, where he eventually settled in St. Louis, Missouri. He and his brother were brokers, shipping supplies down the Mississippi River to plantation owners and buying their cotton for shipment to England. So Thomas established himself as an insurance agent selling fire, marine, and life insurance from an office at the corner of Main and Olive Streets in St. Louis.
Okay.
And he would go on to be a sheriff in the St. Louis County, but when he leaves office, it's discovered that there's a problem with his books. Like there's a significant shortfall.
Oops.
And he turns around and blames his deputy. And when the Civil War broke out, he moved his family to Maryland, where he set up a new insurance office in Baltimore.
Start over.
And by the time the Civil War was in full swing, Thomas is a Confederate sympathizer, and he had written to the Confederate Secretary of War, Leroy Pope Walker, in May of 1861, offering to act as a purchasing agent for Confederate supplies in the Trans-Mississippi Department.
Okay.
Then he volunteers for General Sterling Price's staff with the Confederate Army, and he has these ideas for General Price. It is called the coal torpedo. He wants to attack Union shipping by means of an explosive device disguised as a lump of coal.
Wow. Santa's going to be very, very upset with these boys.
I give him a lump of coal.
Yes, this really would have taken a toll on Santa's coal supply.
Yeah.
Because the coal bombs would be planted in coal piles used to fuel Union steamships and locomotives, and a team of operatives working behind enemy lines would put them there.
Wow.
And when a coal bomb was shoveled into the firebox, it would explode, resulting in the explosion of the pressurized steam boiler and the destruction of the whole vessel, whether it be a boat or a train.
Right.
Now, this idea gets Thomas an audience with Confederate President Jefferson Davis, and by January of 1864, the plan was a go. And what I didn't tell you is that by Confederate bounty law, there was a reward of up to 50% of the value of Union shipping destroyed by means of new inventions.
Oh, wow.
Thomas is given a captain's commission, and he actually sets up the Confederate Secret Service. And they're not paying Thomas in cash, but up to 50% of the value of the ships and the cargo that's destroyed, right?
Right.
They also pay him in Confederate war bonds, which are going to be useless in the long run.
Right.
But this coal torpedo was responsible for sinking the Greyhound, a private steamboat that had been commandeered by General Butler for use as a floating headquarters on the James River on November 27, 1864. And Thomas Courtenay also took credit for the destruction of the gunboat USS Shenango as she sailed from New York Navy Yard on April 15, 1864. And before anyone emails me, this is different than the World War II USS Keeling, which was call sign Greyhound.
Right.
It's a different boat.
Yep.
Now, the reason I told you all of that background information is because Sandy knows of this bomb that can blow up steamships, this coal torpedo.
Okay.
And he wants to improve on the idea. That's called foreshadowing.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Yep. So again, Canadians who are at sea with their own goods during the Civil War can't be touched by the Americans, the Union, or the Confederacy.
Right.
And Southern smugglers would register their ships as owned by a citizen of a neutral country, allowing them to claim to be Canadian or British if they're stopped.
Okay.
So for a fee, Sandy would allow his little name to be used on the paperwork of a bunch of Southern ships.
Wow.
But being the owner on paper also meant that Sandy was the beneficiary of the ship's insurance policy, which gives him big ideas.
He's double dipping.
Yeah. So now here's a guy. He's backhanded, underhanded, dirty. He's just a war profiteer.
Right.
He knows about these coal bombs, and now he's putting his name on ships. So if something should happen to that ship, he makes the money.
Wow.
This is when Sandy meets Harold W. Kinsman, a Charleston, South Carolina furniture manufacturer. Harold bought a paddle wheeler called Caledonia in Liverpool, and he needs an owner of convenience to sign those papers, and Sandy had been recommended to him as politically sound, meaning that he was for the Confederacy and that he was trustworthy.
Okay.
So Sandy agreed to own the ship and promptly sank it on its first blockade voyage.
Wow.
And Sandy was paid $32,000 as the owner of record.
So what did the real owner, didn't he have any say in anything?
The real owner got nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. Because on paper, the ship belonged to Sandy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of see this coming down the road, but keep going.
Yeah. So whenever a ship sank, he would keep the payout. He wouldn't give it to the real owners. And they had no legal recourse.
Right.
But as the war rages on, a whole lot of ships registered to Sandy, a.k.a. Alexander Keith Jr., went a-sinking. They were all sinking.
Ship happens.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Here's another example of Sandy's scheme. When the top Confederate spy in Canada, his name is Patrick Martin, sets sail on his very expensive brand new schooner, a schooner that Sandy and he invested in together, Sandy tells him to sail with one of the ships on its first trip up the St. Lawrence River from Montreal. And Patrick Martin and the boat and his crew were never seen again.
Wow.
And the sole beneficiary was his partner, Sandy,
Yeah.
who received a six-figure payout, $100,000, which is about $2 million in today's money.
Jeez.
Sandy gave not one penny of this money to Patrick Martin's wife or his daughter, even though they begged.
Wow.
Then the other ship, the Marie Victoria, it sank in the St. Lawrence, taking with it, of all things, John Wilkes Booth's valuable costume collection that was being shipped south after his Canadian tour in Montreal.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really odd how all of these things are connected.
Yeah.
So Sandy is sinking these ships and killing all these people and crews for the insurance money, and each time the evidence is all circumstantial. Then Sandy just up and vanishes off the face of the earth, along with $1 million worth of investments and a chambermaid from the Halifax Hotel named Mary Clifton.
Okay.
And I don't think she was just cleaning his room.
Yeah. She was cleaning something.
But people were talking, and Sandy knew that the jig was about to be up. He was going to get caught.
Yep.
So he headed to Boston first, where he hid out. Then he moved on to New York, and he's living high on the hog, as we say. He's living a lavish lifestyle with Mary by his side. Then the various men he's stolen from, the guys he swindled, they hire themselves a private investigator to go looking for Alexander Sandy Keith. His name was Alan Pinkerton.
Ah, Pinkerton.
Yep.
Wow.
I told you it's odd how it's all connected.
Yeah.
Alan Pinkerton was a Scottish-American abolitionist, detective, and spy, best known for creating the Pinkerton National Detective Agency in the United States.
Yeah.
And his claim to fame was foiling a plot in 1861 to assassinate President-elect Abraham Lincoln. They should have had him on the other
Yeah.
assassination attempt.
Yeah, they should have.
When the Civil War began, Pinkerton served as head of the Union intelligence.
Okay.
And he was really good. Not only did he stop the assassination attempt of President Lincoln on his way to Washington, D.C.,
Right.
he could provide estimates of Southern troop numbers to General George B. McClellan when he commanded the Army of the Potomac. And his agents often worked undercover as Confederate soldiers and sympathizers to gather military intelligence.
Okay.
It's a little bit like
National Treasure.
National Treasure.
On a night much like this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like National Treasure. Yeah.
Yeah.
This counterintelligence work done by Pinkerton and his agents is comparable to the work done by today's U.S. Army counterintelligence special agents,
Okay.
in which Pinkerton's agency is considered an early predecessor.
Nice.
And this intelligence service was the predecessor of the U.S. Secret Service as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So all of Pinkerton's work led to the establishment of the Federal Secret Service.
Wow.
So with the help of Pinkerton, they nearly catch Sandy, but he ditches Mary, taking the railroad to the farthest point west he can go, which is at that time is St. Louis.
Okay.
And St. Louis, much like places in Kentucky, was divided, and officially they were neutral. Officially, Kentucky was neutral as well. But there were plenty of devious Confederate operations going on.
I'm sure.
Boat burners for the Confederacy were sneaking around and setting fire to Union ships.
Right.
But Sandy is holed up in St. Louis in the Southern Hotel between 4th and 5th Streets. And Sandy is angry that Confederates who trusted him with their money haven't stopped looking for him.
Wah.
Wah. Once again, he's tracked down, but this time by a detective. And when this happens, Sandy offers him $5,000,
Wow.
a bribe,
Sure.
to look the other way.
Yep.
I was never here. And the detective takes it.
Sure.
Sandy packs up his panties and remaining money, anything that he had, and he goes 30 miles east to Highland, Illinois, where a small group of Swiss immigrants were living. And while he's there, he meets Cecilia, an illegitimate daughter of Madame Louise Paris, a milliner. Sandy and Cecilia marry a few short months later. These two settled down and would often visit Cecilia's family in St. Louis.
Okay.
Now, by this time, it's 1865. The Civil War is over on April 9th, 1865, when
Right.
General Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox in Virginia.
Yep.
So Sandy's blockade running days are over, and he's hiding out, but his scheming ways, he's never going to leave those behind.
Can't change your leopard spots.
You can't change a leopard's spots, even in 1865. In December of 1865, while he's sleeping off a hangover from a Christmas party, Sandy and Cecilia awake to loud knocking at the door of their room at the Highland boarding house. Sandy opens the door, and waiting for him is a U.S. Marshal, a St. Louis detective, and one of the men who'd lost their money. His name was Luther Rice Smoot, who was a quartermaster of the state of Virginia. Luther was in charge of the transportation from contractors to storage, and he had also entrusted $25,000 to Sandy. So these three men take Sandy against his will. I can just see him hanging on to the edges of the door frame as they're trying to get him out. He's a big guy.
Okay.
They take him back to St. Louis. They lock him up in the city jail until he could come up with enough money to satisfy Luther Rice Smoot.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, that's all he wanted.
Wow.
Luther wanted I want my money back.
Yeah, exactly.
And because Luther had found him, Sandy, who thought he was going to ride off into the sunset and live a comfortable life away from all the nefarious activities, he becomes a little paranoid. Who else is coming after me,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yep.
He's afraid everybody else is going to come after him. So Sandy feigns his innocence. He argues that he had no knowledge of the real purchasers or their nefarious purposes.
Mm-hmm.
He insisted he'd been hired by Lang, a respectable Halifax businessman. Remarkably, the alibi works, and Sandy is released to return to Halifax while each of his thwarted partners sat in the courtroom enraged.
Wow.
They just let him go.
Jeez.
Now, I also read that he did pay Luther Smoot, $10,000.
Okay.
Whether that happened or not, I'm not sure.
Right.
So in January of 1866, Sandy and Cecilia leave for New York City. And from there, these two board a transatlantic ship bound for Germany. And now their names are William King Thompson, and she is Cecilia Thompson.
Okay.
He's going to leave his name behind.
Yeah.
He's not Sandy Keith anymore.
Yep.
And for several years, Sandy and his wife lived the high life in Dresden. And all this stolen money fuels their lifestyle. And they're friends with expatriate American socialites, all the expats.
Okay.
The most famous of which were the American consul at Leipzig, John Stewart, and his wife.
Oh, wow.
They went through the money super fast. They were throwing parties. They were spending like crazy. But Sandy knows we're eventually going to run out of money.
Right.
And 5 years after they arrive in Germany, they're now down to $5,000. And Sandy Keith, now known as William King Thompson, turns back to his old ways of marine insurance fraud.
Wow.
And here is his new plan.
Okay.
He'd taken out so many other ships before with the coal bomb, but he didn't need to have his name on the ship now. There's no way he's going to get his name on a ship. So what he would do is have worthless goods insured for huge amounts of money, then place them aboard a ship carrying one of his bombs. He hired a clockmaker, J.J. Fuchs, to design a clock timer that could use a hammer.
Jeez.
Now, whether Fuchs knew what he was doing or not, he was creating the very first time bomb.
Wow.
Sandy loaded up a barrel full of dynamite. He told the bank it was full of gold, and he had it insured for this astronomical amount of money.
The bank didn't even bother to look?
That's a really good question.
Wow.
They did not look. The dynamite inside was set to detonate while they were voyaging to New York. And when the timer went off, everyone would be dead. If the timer went off.
Yeah.
But the barrels of dynamite arrived safely in New York City. And worse than that, Sandy had to ship it all back to Germany.
Oh.
He reassessed his plan and he did it again. And this time, the bank said, we need to see that barrel of gold. We need to see the traveling gold.
Yep.
And then he says, oh, gold. Did I say gold? It's caviar.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And he had the caviar insured.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't for very much money. It wasn't as much as he wanted. But at this point, beggars can't be choosers.
Sure. He needed the cash.
So Sandy had the caviar/dynamite shipping on a boat called the Moselle from Bremerhaven on December 13th, 1875, traveling under the name William King Thomas. Sandy took his bomb, packed it in a barrel, and took it to the harbor. He left the barrel with the porters. He boarded the Moselle and took a first-class cabin. Now, outside, all these people are dropping off their luggage. They're saying goodbye. There are all kinds of people waiting to wave goodbye to the ship. Think the Titanic.
Yeah.
Think about the movie Titanic.
This way, please, this view.
That's what it was like when people would ship people off on transatlantic voyages.
Right.
So it's really, really busy out there. And these two porters, they load his barrel with dynamite/caviar onto a horse-drawn wagon, and they're wheeling it toward the ship. And when they're attaching it to a winch, it suddenly fell and hit the dock, and it exploded with tremendous force.
Wow.
Witnesses describe the scene as a battlefield. The blast caved in the bow of the Moselle, and it buckled the deck of the Simpson, which was its tugboat. Cabins and decks were covered with sand, broken glass, and pieces of wood and twisted iron. On the cobbled loading area of the dock, the explosion produced a black, smoking hole 6 feet deep and 7 feet wide.
Wow.
There were body parts everywhere, and the air was filled with moans of wounded and dying people.
Jeez.
Alexander Sandy Keith had just killed 81 people and seriously injured 50 more.
Wow.
Now, he's in his cabin, remember?
Sure.
And he heard the blast, and he realized what had happened.
Right.
And he rushed onto the deck, and he looks down at the carnage below, and he realizes that he caused all this. I read that he took some deep swigs from his schnapps flask, and he went back to his cabin. He sat down and wrote a letter in heavy pencil to his wife, quote, "God bless you and my darling children. You will never see me to speak again," end quote.
Wow.
He wrote another to the Moselle's captain, quote, "What I have seen today I cannot stand," end quote. Then he picked up his revolver and pumped 2 bullets into his head.
Wow.
But the world wasn't done with Sandy. The Lord wasn't going to let him go that easily.
Yeah.
With all the carnage and suffering that he had given to the world. Because remember, when he's blowing up these ships, too, for the insurance money, he's blowing up the crew.
Sure.
But he'd just never seen it before with his own eyes.
Sure.
Rescuers discover him groaning in his cabin. They went from cabin to cabin looking for people to make sure everybody was okay. Even though the bomb went off outside the ship, it still rocked the ship.
Of course.
So they're looking for all of the passengers.
Right.
And these rescuers discover him groaning in his cabin. They took him to the baggage hall because that had been turned into a makeshift hospital. And he's laying among all these victims. And this is all his fault. And the police inspectors interrogated him, and they finally get from him just the briefest of confessions.
Wow.
5 days later, he's got 2 bullets in his head.
I was about ready to say
he's still alive.
Yeah, they interrogated him. He's
still alive. He's
whiz.
just moaning in pain. He suffers for a while.
Wow.
And 5 days later, Cecilia was led to him in his final hours. She saw him, and he was in such a terrible state. She begged the doctors, quote, kill him,
Jeez.
end quote.
Wow.
Then she threw herself at her husband's side and urged him to repent. But Sandy gave her no satisfaction. Instead, his last words were, quote, "I have been a thick head. The fellows in New York are guilty," end quote.
Okay, what does that mean?
I think it means I was an idiot and I was following other people's orders. Like he wasn't going to take it on himself.
It wasn't his fault.
After Sandy's death, a massive investigation ensued on both sides of the Atlantic to find his real identity and to establish whether he had accomplices. The news spread rapidly in the international press, striking panic in ocean travelers who wondered whether they might be the next victim of a new species of criminal. People are just going to blow up their ship.
Sure.
In St. Louis, reading the sensational reports, the staff at the Southern Hotel had this eerie feeling that they may have known this guy, the guy in the headlines known as the Dynamite Fiend. He was described as a fat, bearded gentleman with a voracious appetite who constantly bragged about his blockade running days. And one of the clerks who worked at the hotel, he sees his opportunity for fame. He runs down to the St. Louis Republican, the newspaper. He tells the reporters of the mysterious stranger who'd come there 10 years ago. And the newspaper ran the story, and the famous detective Alan Pinkerton, who'd been hired by the Bremen police to investigate, rushes into St. Louis to confirm it.
Yeah.
In Bremen, the coroner requested permission to preserve the Dynamite Fiend's head for scientific purposes. They wanted to preserve Sandy's head.
Really?
For scientific purposes.
I wonder what that was about.
The rest of Sandy's body was tossed into a pauper's grave,
Wow.
but the head was placed in a jar. I'm getting like, Silence of the Lambs vibes.
Dr. Lecter, whose head is in that bottle?
And kept in a Bremen museum.
Wow.
And local legend has it, Rob's going to love this, that during an Allied bombing of the city during World War II, the jar burst open, dumping the head into the rubble and the mayhem where it was mixed with newly dismembered body parts.
Wow. Kind of apropos.
And that was the last of Alexander Keith Jr. He was lost forever.
Wow.
That's the story of the Dynamite Fiend. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well, I think I learned more about the Civil War in that episode than I knew the entire time. Yeah, it was pretty crazy, though.
I know I gave lots of side stories along with Sandy's, but I thought it was important because they all intersected, and all those other people who were famous were a part of his story as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just crazy.
The Pinkerton thing is pretty cool.
It's very cool. I agree.
Well, Pinkerton, he really didn't have anything to do with the ones coming up.
He wouldn't have any trouble with these criminals.
No, he'd find these out real quick. Anyway, let's do a little Bless Your Heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right, number one, I'm calling, wow, what a party pooper.
What a party pooper. That's usually me, by the way. I'm the
Well.
one like, can we go home? I'm ready to go home.
I don't think this has anything to do with that.
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Talk about a party
Oh,
pooper.
no. Now that I've said that.
Yep, a substitute teacher in Florida has been arrested after police say she attempted to ruin a child's outdoor birthday party by smearing feces all over picnic benches.
Oh, my gosh. I'm not that kind of party pooper. I just want to go home and go to sleep.
Yeah. Heather Carpenter, 42, was unhappy with the way the principal at Philippi Shores Elementary School in Sarasota handled a complaint she'd filed, police say.
Okay.
So,
She's 42.
in an effort to get back at her, she showed up at Ufer Park, and once again, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She showed up at Ufer Park where the principal was boasting a birthday party for her daughter. Quote, I saw a lady wearing a mask and had rubber gloves on, witness Michael Hutchinson says. She had a cup of something. She was pouring it out on the tables and then wiping it in. She went table to table. Police identified the substance in the cup as human feces.
That is a party pooper.
Yeah, Carpenter, who faces criminal mischief charges, is being held on $2,500 bond. And needless to say, she no longer works at Philippi Shores Elementary School.
You know who I feel bad for?
Who?
The daughter. It was her birthday
Yeah.
party.
Oh, my God.
I feel bad for the little girl.
Yeah. All right, number two, fingerprints, DNA, or better yet, Cheetos.
Oh, no.
Police say 19-year-old Austin Lee Westfall Pressler, there's a name, broke into a convenience store and made off with $160 worth of beer, cigarettes, snacks, and energy drinks.
Must have been some Cheetos in there somewhere.
Well, on the way out, he punctured a couple bags of Cheetos, which ended up on the floor, and then he stomped all over them. The trail led out of the doorway all the way to a parking lot across the street where witnesses said Pressler had parked his car.
Oh.
Yeah. An orange trail of Cheetos led police in South Carolina to a burglary suspect's hideout.
The Cheetos will get you every time,
They will.
man.
They went to a nearby home where Pressler was staying and found the car and fresh Cheetos on the front porch. Dumber.
Oh, Frito-Lay, if you only knew how good you were at helping to solve crime.
Exactly. All right, number 3, and finally, she won't tap dance her way out of this anytime soon.
Okay, I'm afraid. What is this one?
Well, a South Dakota grandmother got 4 speeding tickets in less than 3 hours, including one for going 112 miles per hour.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Loretta Lacey raced
500. I love her name, too. Loretta Lacey.
Raced 525 miles from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, to Racine, Wisconsin, to make her granddaughter's middle school dance.
Oh my God.
I know.
God love her heart. Yeah. Bless her heart.
Lacey was first pulled over by a state trooper for doing 112 miles an hour and ticketed for speeding, having no proof, have no insurance, and here's the kicker.
What?
And possession of marijuana.
No. How old was she?
52 or something like that. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Lacey. Oh, she's 49. Sorry.
Oh, so she's not like an old grandma.
No, she kept going, getting a second ticket for going 99 miles an hour and 2 more going 88 miles an hour. With all the unplanned stops, Lacey didn't make it to the dance
that was
on
my
time.
question. Did she make it?
She didn't get there.
Oh.
All for naught. So there you go.
Oh my God. That's comedic gold right there. Grandma Lacey got 3 speeding tickets.
And busted for marijuana.
And busted for pot on top of it. She's got a little weed in the car. She's a cool grandma.
Grandma.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing, all you got to do is go to Hitched to Homicide. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu, and while you're there, you can suggest a case or tell us about your own true crime story.
Please do.
That's all we have today. After grandmas and pot, 3 speeding tickets, I'm done. I'm tapping out. That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.